Hey all, how's it going? I did a full production on this track this week, and it is based off the Isaac Hayes tune called IKES Rap 2, which, if you hear that, is, a tune in itself, and it was then sampled by Portishead and Tricky. The Portishead tune is called Glory Box, and the Tricky song is called Hell is Around the Corner. So in all honesty, I knew the Portishead tune, or sampled version, I should say, and that's what I was interested in, and subsequently I learned this was an Isaac Hayes track. It was played by a drummer named Willie Hall, who, did a bunch of Isaac Hayes recordings, all Stax record label stuff, and the thing that I love about this track mainly is the touch that he used to get this sound, and it's really interesting because if you play this beat and try to recreate the sound, it doesn't work unless you play it super light. Anything harder on the snare is it just changes the whole intent of the sound and the vibe of the drum track and the whole piece in general. So my whole objective in doing kind of explorations like this is to improve my engineering, see if I can recreate a sound, and open my ears up to do this. So this one was way more difficult than I thought it would be. I really thought I would throw up a few mics, play the beat, do some EQing, and then bam, it was there. I found it really interesting to try to get the punch out of the kick drum that blended with the bass. And of course I don't have the exact bass tone or anything like that, but I got as close as I could as far as that goes. And just seeing how I can blend these things in to make them work together. So some things I learned from this are about touch. I had a handful of mics up. I had a mono overhead and a hi-hat mic up. I did have my stereo rooms up, which I didn't think I would use, but I ended up really only going down to top snare, bottom snare, and one bass drum mic. So 3 mics for this whole setup. Hi-hat mic got cut. No tom mics. You hear the toms quite prevalent in that bleed, which is really interesting, and no overheads. I really thought the mono overhead was going to be the sound, but the way I was able to get closest to it was just like I said, the top and bottom snare and the kick, which you'll see. Also learned a lot about EQing and then trying to get this kind of vinyl sound on it. So I was using some tape simulation and a mic pre-simulation that it gets close, but it definitely gives it some drive and some hair that the drums kind of needed to get that, which I'll show you. And a couple other essential things was I used a Superphonic snare drum, so I needed some kind of metal or brass snare to have the kind of brightness to this. At one point I actually changed to this drum, which is my old Radio King snare, 30s era, because I thought I was having a hard time getting the sound, and I thought, well, maybe it's a wood drum, and I went to that and it was definitively not that drum. So that was cool. My initial thought was correct, and I went a little deeper and found out that I was correct in that assumption. I also used some super light, very old 50s era Zildjian hats that are super thin, 14-inch. That if I use those, they're for this type of track. It's super light, but that was really important to the sound too. Anything thicker wasn't really sounding correct. I tried with a few different hats, and this was the one that seemed the closest. So those are some interesting things to figure out. All right, so let's dive in. Hopefully you learn a lot from this. I haven't done one of these in a while. Actually, since I started the Patreon, I have other of these on YouTube, and I've been asked to get back to them by a few guys. So they're pretty intensive, but man, it's really a great learning experience. So all right, enjoy IKES Rap 2, Portishead, Tricky, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely Isaac Hayes, played by Willie Hall. All right, here's the kick soloed, no EQ. get the punch, I've rolled a lot of this low end out, just almost to like 150 here. As you can hear, that's very punchy. Here's with a little compression on it to add help the little punch and kind of make the decay a little shorter. Okay, for the snare, I did some really weird EQing here because there is kind of this punchy oomph that the snare gets that I was really searching for. I was boosting a lot of this 60K, which seems very odd to me, but it seemed to be doing the right thing, and also boosting at about 460 here, like really cranking it. And then because there's no hi-hat mic, the hi-hat bleed is really what we're hearing through the snare. I'm cranking the top end here, and you'll hear it without that here. And that high end on the snare is really, really critical to what we're hearing. Here's the bottom snare. I did a similar thing here where I was really kind of boosting some of this low end because it seems to me a lot of the sound we're hearing in the room is this bottom snare real high. So I'm doing a very similar thing, boosting this 450 here. Here's without it. So you hear that beef come out of that kind of lower woofy tone. The interesting thing is, though, all together with the instruments in, this is what seemed to give it that more of what the sound I was hearing from the actual recording. Again, I think this is how just that particular drum on the actual recording was reacting in the room. Of course, some of it could be that particular drum, but the drum I have is pretty hardy. So yeah, this was a tricky part to recreate, getting this snare sound, trickier than I thought it would be. So here are both the top and bottom snare together. Okay, so then what I did is I took this virtual tape processing, and I really cranked it to get some of this kind of get some hair on it. Okay, there's a bit of hair. Then I took this radiator plug-in, which is modeling an old Altec. Crank the input a bit here, put it on the mic setting, crank the bass and treble here, brought the output back a little. Here's without it, and I'll add it. So you hear how the clarity of the bottom snare really comes through, and some of that attack on the kick drum really comes through when we add this. It's adding some punch, it's adding some definition, and the drums in Glory Box are even though they're hit very lightly, there's punch to them. And this is the way that I figured out how to get close to that. Last but not least, I added some EQ here. I put the whole thing through this 1176. I'll add that for you. I'll add this EQ now. Okay, so we go. That's a pretty great dry tone. That's what we have just with the drums, a little bit of EQ processing, a little bit of compression on the bus here. And really what we're trying to do is simulate this kit that was in this room. Next, of course, we need some hall. We need some reverb. So what I finally figured out, it seemed as if I sent the snare top and especially the snare bottom, and I'll give you the difference between just one and the other. Once I sent that snare bottom through, that really seemed to, I guess it's that frequency of the bottom snare, seemed to give it this kind of illusion of the open space. Let me get onto the reverb channel first. Okay, so if you listen very closely, you will hear what sounds like slapback off a wall. So what I did first was I simulated that with this primal tap. And let's see, I will do that with both these in. We'll talk about these simultaneously. So here is with the slapback but no verb. Okay, so that makes it seem like we're in a certain size room. And to me, listening to the recording, when there is open space, it sounded to me as if there was almost a triplet type delay. Okay, next we need some ambience in the room. So I'm using this little plate here. Okay, so that's a very long plate, about 6 seconds, but of course that's getting soaked up by other instruments when we turn the bass and the string part on. And last but not least, I tried to clear out some of this verb to really help bring this, I guess, like 5K through, which again is the bottom snare, and I rolled off some of the bottom end here, and that helped to bring some clarity to this. So here it is without the EQ. Okay, so let me rewind a little now here. I'm going to give you the versions with, so here's just the top snare going through the verb. just do the bottom snare through the verb. That to me is where you can also really hear the delay, the kind of simulated slapback in the room. Okay, so that's, and now let's hear both of these together through the verb. So you can hear by sending both of those through, we're really getting the sound of the snare, the kind of fatness and fullness of the snare with the top snare in there, and then a little more clarity in the high end through the bottom snare through that verb. Let's add in bass next, now that we've heard all that, and see what it kind of does to the verb and how it, it's obviously going to be more dense. The bass is taking up more space, dries up some of the verb that you hear, things like that. So by adding another instrument in, we lose some of the qualities that we hear in the drums. There's less. It's more dense, so there's less of these little things that you're hearing come out of the drums. It's being covered up by the sonic qualities of the bass, and the bass is quite loud in the Portishead mix. So that's, here it may seem unusually loud, but that's kind of the way this track is mixed. The bass, it's very bass heavy. So let's next add in the string part, and again, it's just more density. So you hear how it changes the drum sound. So again, this is why we need this added punch in the kick drum that we took on. In fact, let's listen to the whole track, and I'll just kind of mess with some of these EQs as we go, so you can kind of hear, what I was hearing as I was going through this process without some of this stuff. So you can hear how each one of those little things is affecting the overall drum sound. And just let me reiterate that I think a lot of this was just happening in the room. I don't think they manipulated the drums this much. But this was just my way of working through it to try to get as close as I could to it.